Welcome to Barnaby's podcast, Eye of the Beholder. Barnaby's is one of the leading search engines for art, design, antiques and collectibles from over 3,000 auction houses worldwide. We aim to make the art and auction market more transparent and accessible to everyone, from beginners to collectors and professionals. Today we will talk to the Swedish artist Alexander Klingspor, who is current in New York, where his work New York City Legend is shown at Union Square. Welcome to the Barnaby's podcast, Alexander.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we have chosen to call this episode Legend Revived, an alligator in New York, because of the sculpture you're shown at Union Square, New York at the moment. But what is this legend about?
A legend is about an animal that you could call an invasive species of New York. And it's actually built on true facts. The species didn't end up there by itself. There has been a trade as far back as I could see. Some say it goes back even further, but for the past 100 years, alligators have been sold via mail order from Louisiana and Florida up to New York. And when this legend was formed, the original story goes something like this. Imagine somebody throwing a baby alligator down the toilet, and it survived the journey down to the sewers. And down there it grew to a monstrous shape, where it possibly became a man-eater, and sightings were starting to take place. This is somehow where sort of the initial story of this urban legend. Now it has taken many shapes and forms since then. The alligators are sometimes albino, sometimes they are mutated because of some radioactive or biohazardous sludge that they've eaten, and so on and so on. But what's interesting here is that the alligators keep on turning up in New York. So as late as in February, March this year, an alligator was found in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. This was a 4-foot alligator, and they nicknamed her Godzilla, and she was taken to the Bronx Zoo. And before that, another one turned up the year 2020. And you can date this back to, I think the earliest articles come somewhere around 1930s.
But so the one that they found in February was it returned to the zoo in Brooklyn, or this was one of the ones that they found that belonged to someone else before?
Yes, the way that this usually happens is that some pet owner, for whatever reason, decides I don't no longer want this alligator, and they release them. And this has been a trend that's been going on since I think 1920s, 1930s. So alligators have been found in the Harlem area. They've been found in the East River, in the Hudson. So it's a phenomenon that's reoccurring.
And how come you heard about the legend?
I have lived in New York for 11 years, from 2008 to 2019. And during that time, I became familiar with the legend.
But and how come you were? I mean, obviously the legend inspired you, but how come you decided to do art about it?
The idea came to me when I was visiting the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City, in Mexico. I saw these amazing artifacts and sculptures by ancient Central American civilizations. And I saw that they had carved a lot of stone carvings of animal creatures, deities or guardians, And I was wondering, do we have anything similar in our time? And that's when it struck me. We do have an urban legend in New York City. And since I happened to live there at the time, I got interested in the idea. But it wasn't actually until the pandemic that I realized this idea. I had to take a step back, I think, from New York. I had moved in 2019 to London, and the pandemic hit a year later. And sitting in my studio, I digested these ideas, and I said to myself, I want to make a tribute to the city of New York, the city that I love very much. And so the more I read up on the alligator, the more I realized that the alligator is very similar to New York and New Yorkers. Alligators are tremendous survivors. They're built to survive in the extreme, just like New York and New Yorkers.
What is so special about the city, you think?
New York has that magic energy. I think it's partly because of everybody who's there is fighting to be there. There's very few people there who sort of just randomly ended up there and just hang around because it's too expensive to have that kind of a lifestyle in New York. So people really fight and feel that this is a place that they've kind of made it just by being there. And that's part of it. Also, it is the city of dreams and the city of all cities, the city that never sleeps. It has, for the longest time, been a place where no ambition is too grand. You really can go in and try to make it in whatever career. And because it has such a, I mean, it's one of the if not the strongest financial hub of the world, it pulls in a lot of expertise from all areas. So there's so much knowledge passing through, and that makes it also very, very attractive for anybody who wants to explore and develop themselves and so on.
I spoke to your gallery, and they told me that this whole idea to show this sculpture in New York came up after a night out. Tell us, how did you get the idea?
Well, we were discussing it. I think the first sculpture I did, I I I kind of included this little alligator legend in that sculpture, but that was to try to tell that or describe it to without showing it. It's basically, imagine a human cranium merged with the streets of New York. I called it hybrid speciation, um, and the term implies two species that mate and a new species is born. Kind of this. I wanted to reflect on how what happens to a human being when human being stays in an urban environment, a man-made environment. Basically, you're a product of your own environment in that sense. So I merged this cranium with these details of the streets of New York, and I added the little alligator sculpture there. And I think that was the first idea I had about the urban legend coming out of this manhole cover on the side of this cranium. We cast this one, and we had a success with that sculpture. We made an edition of 12, and they sold out very quickly. And the next one I did was a small, was the one that's now standing on Union Square, a larger format, but there's a smaller one, cast of 49. And after I created that one, we had a drink, as I recall it, and I said we may have something here that is iconic, that we can make into a large monumental sculpture, a public art
And did you
piece.
see the spot in front of you, Union Square?
I have my latest studio in New York was 1 block away from where the sculpture now stands. So I knew this area well in New York. Union Square is to me a very dear place because I have many fond memories from there, and it's also a very central hub. And when I first started talking to New York City parks, and they showed me the list of where the potential spaces we could apply for having this exhibited. When I saw Union Square, I knew exactly which corner they meant, and I said, "This is it. That's the place." So it was kind of my home for many years. So I knew where I wanted to place it.
But does it used to be art in that corner, or was this the first time they're showing something?
That corner is a part of our rotating arts program. So sculptures placed there are there for 6 months to a year.
And now it's a Swedish artist, Alexander Klingspor, who showed the legend and the myth of New York. It's quite interesting. But if you take a look on the sculpture, you see the alligator, obviously, um, but there's also some other details. What is more shown?
You have discarded objects around the alligator, and I placed them there as a commentary of our time. I wanted this to be like a reflection of the era we live in now. So I placed objects, trash, if you will, that were common in the pandemic and are common now, such as a COVID test, a fast food takeout bag, plastic straw, a coin, etc., etc. And the reason for doing that is I think some of these objects will soon be passé. I don't think that any one of us will miss a COVID test. And the plastic straws are being phased out. Currency is changing very fast, the way it has a physical shape. I don't think coins might be around that much longer. And if you look at the lifespan of a bronze sculpture, it lasts for millennia. So what's common now may be a little bit strange in a decade or two, and you may be completely maybe a complete riddle in 100 years or 200 years. So in that way, the sculpture is also a time capsule from our time into the future.
How did COVID actually affected you as an artist? Was that a hard time?
Yes, it was a hard time for me. I got COVID. I was one of the first ones to get it. I got it in late February, early March 2020. And I was locked up in my studio uh, during that time in London. So I was also, well, we were all kept in this energy of uncertainty. Nobody knew exactly what COVID was. So it was quite uneasy, the whole experience. I never got any, fortunately, and no problems with my lungs, but I did get the COVID fatigue. It took me about 7 months to totally recover. But during that time, I didn't have much physical energy, but I did have the energy to think a lot. And it was part of that during that period that this sculpture came to be in my mind.
But how was the landscape of exhibitions, and how did you survive as an artist? Because nobody could go to galleries, right?
That is true. Yes, I've been fortunate because I had quite many private commissions that I was working on, and my collectors were not stopping to buy art. So I worked at a slower pace, but I could still manage.
So, I mean, you told me a bit, but what is your personal connection with New York, and how has that influenced your work? Not just this one with the alligator, but in general.
Oh, it has influenced me tremendously. I came to New York in the beginning of 2000, I think, for the first time, looking for galleries. And I had one of those almost cliche starts in New York. I walked around, introduced myself with my portfolio, and I just went in cold to galleries. So I was very young and naive. And of course, they basically threw me out. They said, no, we don't look at people coming in like that. And then there was one gallery down in Soho that I really wanted. And I walked in there with an artist friend of mine named Josh George. And Josh knew the gallery owner a little bit. He introduced me to him, but the gallery owner said, no, we don't look at artwork, coming in from the street. We don't do that. And then he changed his mind and said, well, you know what? I'll give you 15 minutes. Come back at 10 a.m. tomorrow. So I came back the next day, and I mean, this is a long time ago. So back then you had little slides that you show your work in. So I showed my slides to him. He stood there with a magnifying glass looking at him. And then he said, who have you shown these to? And I said, no one. And he said, good. Don't. I'll keep these. I want you to work for me. And then he showed me his gallery, and sort of as if he almost sold it to me, and I thought to myself, is this for real? And yeah, and then he said, go back home and give me 5 paintings. I want to show them. I think the first, I can't recall now if it was an art fair down in Miami, I think he was going to take them to. So I went back home. I gave him 5 paintings. I created them. I was very excited about the whole thing. And then he called me again and he said, look, we sold them all. And we priced them too low, so I had to raise them $1,000 each or whatever it was. It was this unbelievable. And at that time in my career, I was thinking, starting to question myself, is this really going to work? And then he said, look, I don't want to, I don't know if I should tell you this, but your first buyer is Whoopi Goldberg. So that was my new start with the New York Gallery. So that's why I love that city so much. There is no other place, I think, where you can have those kind of roller coasters of ups and downs that like in New York. So I was hooked immediately, of course. But it took me till 2008 when I had worked up a steady budget to move to New York, so that I was going to paint for my third one-man show. But then during that time, New York went through a turbulent period. The financial crisis hit and so on, but that didn't deter me. I ended up staying for 11 years.
Okay, wow, that's a long time. But now you live in London, right?
Correct. I live in London.
But you not only sculpt, but you also paint, right? And you're educated in a kind of classical school, I would say, at least. How? I mean, first of all, how has the classics affected your art, or yeah, the way you paint and create?
Yes, I would say I'm a classical painter, but I went a kind of an unorthodox education, if you may. I started actually as wanting to become an illustrator because I didn't understand really what it meant to be an artist, and I was determined since I was 16 years old. So my first teachers were illustrators up until the age I was 19. I studied with, amongst others, Michael Boston, who is a fantastic artist and illustrator in Stockholm. And he was very active in the illustration scene at the time. So he taught me a few techniques, and then he said, you should visit some of my teachers in America. So I went for a 3-month trip from East Coast to West Coast, staying with various artists and illustrators. And I ended up in Kansas City, Missouri, out of all places, where I was educated by father and son, both two very tremendous painters and illustrators, Mark English and John English. And that was sort of the basis of my education. Um, and during my time in Kansas City, I got familiar with Edward Hopper and his work. And at the time, Kansas City was suffering from a syndrome where in America that was very common. I don't know how it is now, but back then the core of the city would be empty, the downtown area, and everybody would live outside in the suburbs and maybe go in and work at banks and offices. And Kansas City is really beautiful. It's like some parts it's like a slice of Manhattan in the downtown area. And to walk around there in the afternoons and the weekends, I was just so inspired with these desolate areas. And when I came home, I kind of felt the same energy in Stockholm, especially in the winter nights. Very few people on the streets and so on. So I started painting with Hopper in my mind. And then I quickly got inspired by Rembrandt, going to the National Museum, seeing some of his paintings and his textures and his light. And from there began a kind of a love affair with the classical techniques. And I managed to find a teacher in Sweden, a copyist for the National Museum, Magnus Bratt, who taught me 16th century layering techniques.
So, who would you say is your biggest source of inspiration then, when it comes to the old masters or?
I would say Caravaggio was one of my early sources of inspiration, and Rembrandt, of course. And then I moved over to Titian and Rubens. So those were the ones that, if you want to call them, well, they're in different times eras, but those are the main guys that I looked at to begin with.
And as you mentioned, I mean, I can also see Hopper in your paintings, but I also do sometimes see a little bit of Magritte. Can you see that?
Yes, absolutely. Magritte and the Surrealists came in much later, and I think it had to do with my developing as a person and an artist. Having lived in cities for so long, sometime in New York, I started sort of longing for nature, longing for something else, and my characters in this fictive universe that I had created. My characters were first in these urban environments because that's kind of what I painted. That's where I was in my real life. Well, these characters then started searching for other places, so they came to the outskirts of this fictive city, and were encountering this ocean, and there some form of more dreamlike or surrealistic images started appearing more and more.
What about you? You sell, or it's not you selling, but there are paintings sold from you at the secondary market at auctions. How is that to be a contemporary artist and see your works at an auction?
Oh, it's of course both. Um, I feel both honored and humbled and terrified because, well, the secondary market is it's a very impulsive market, and anything can happen in an auction room, as you know. So therefore it's a bit terrifying. But so it's, I would say, after now that it has happened a few times, I feel a little bit more relaxed about it. And of course, I develop as an artist every day, I hope. But as the years go by and you look back at what you've done before and you see, oh my God, that was that period and so on. It can be both nostalgic and also you can be met, you can have a feeling of almost not embarrassment, but you feel as if you look back at your younger self in a way, which can be very exposing, I guess. So, but it's also at the end of the day, it's part of the business, the the art business, and paintings do change owners, and I like I said, I feel humbled and also honored that there is a secondary market.
Yeah, exactly. I guess there's a yeah, part of being an artist today. The secondary market is also coming at you quite quick today if you're successful, I guess, more than before.
Yes, I do believe so.
Yeah, I think yeah, at that time the market became more mature before it become the secondary market.
I think so. I mean, I'm
I don't know if you agree, but
from the little I know about it, since I'm mostly focused on creating my paintings, but seeing it from what I can tell, I agree with you. I think there's the secondary market is very active today.
you started dedicating yourself to sculpture during the pandemic, as we spoke about. What is the process of sculpting this alligator, for example, of bronze? Because that's a totally another medium than painting, right?
Yes, I studied sculpting for about 6 years at the Art Students League in New York City, but I can only study it part time, hence the 6 years, because I was painting full time at it. So I, I came to love the medium almost immediately, and I was a little bit intimidated by it. So I didn't do anything with it until the pandemic had hit, and I was alone in the studio, and there was some uh, real time to experiment. And the most interesting difference that I experience is the way you have to think when it comes to composition. You compose a sculpture, you have to think of it from all the angles, whereas a painting, you only have one vantage point.
True. But what about the process when it's made? Because obviously you make it as an artist, but then there are more people engage doing it, right? Uh, and what is your?
Yes.
Are you there during the whole process, or are you the ones that adjust the final, how do you say, touch in the end, or?
When you're working on a sculpture, you're working with a team. That's very true. I can control the clay, which is then turned into a wax copy, and I can control the wax copy because that's another way of modeling. But then, at least I'm talking for me personally, some artists know the whole process, but then I have to leave it to uh, someone else. And after the wax has been turned into a bronze, which is a quite interesting process, then it comes out in metal, and the metal it has a lot of blemishes on it from the casting procedure. And somebody has to be in my hands, acting for me, so to say, because I can't, I'm not trained in metal, um, the art of working in bronze. So in this case, for the big sculpture that I did, I worked with a fantastic artist named Fabio, who works at the Perseo Foundry. And although Fabio only speaks Italian and my Italian is not that good, he understands me very well. He's very intuitive, and he has the kind of same mindset, and he understands what textures and what sort of details I want. So having a good metal worker is kind of one of the secrets to a successful sculpture.
Was he there for the opening or installation?
No, no, unfortunately, no. They were busy with other works, I guess. So
But someone that was there was the Swedish Queen, actually.
yes,
How come the Swedish Queen went to New York to participate?
well, I think the Queen had other an agenda of her own, of course, but it happened to coincide with the unveiling. So we were very lucky that she could be present. And we were very happy that she came and also gave a speech.
Quite fantastic, actually. Even if the royal family in Sweden is interested about the art, obviously, but still an amazing opportunity. How long will the sculpture be shown at Union Square?
So the sculpture is up for at least 8 months, possibly a year. We are talking to the city about trying to make it a permanent installation. Not on that location, but somewhere nearby, hopefully.
Interesting. But that's, I guess, it's a long discussion and everything. But what do you hope your viewers and visitors to New York City Legend take away from your work until then?
I'm hoping that this sculpture reflects a little bit about that magic energy that I talked about, a little bit about the city that never sleeps, where myths and legends kind of live, and where no dream is too big. So I hope something in my sculpture reflects that, of course.
And what is next for you then after this project, which has gained a lot of interest and a lot of excitement both in media and yeah, in general? What's next for you?
Next up is a show in May together with Malbrig's Gallery, and it's going to take place somewhere in New York City. We will reveal when and where.
Okay, so you will continue to work internationally as well as in Sweden, I guess.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're looking very much forward to see both what happens with the alligator because I think it's an interesting piece in many ways, but also for the New Yorkers to be able to capitalize on their own myth, I would say, because I guess a lot of New Yorkers doesn't even knew about this before they heard about this sculpture.
They, some of them did, and some of them didn't. It's fairly well known in New York. What struck me was that it gained a lot of traction in the media, from New York Times to CNN to Washington Post and so on. It even ended up in the top five news of CNN. And I think we all realized that we're just exhibiting a sculpture. I have created a sculpture that, in a time where there's a lot of political division and a split in the world of different opinions, it doesn't matter what you think or believe in. You can always like an urban legend like the alligator. So it was fantastic to see the response it has gotten.
It was good news among bad news.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, Alexander, time is running out. But I hope everyone that has the possibility will go to Union Square to see your very interesting piece of art. And if people are not, hopefully that will then stay in New York, that sculpture, somewhere. And when that is happening, for sure we will get back to you to see where that will be. But thank you so much for participating in the pod today.
Thank you for having me.
To keep up with the latest trends and receive weekly updates on the art and auction world, subscribe to our newsletter on barnabys.com or read Barnabys magazine online.